Welcome to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I'm Club President Steve Chevalier. I'm a director at Zober Limited and the Zober Family Foundation, and we are meeting at this club for the third time virtually in our 107-year history. Traditionally, we like to start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so please join me in pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So usually we start our meetings out with some sort of an invocation, but today we felt a tribute to past President Ed Heineke would be more appropriate. Ed was president back in the day. He was 97 years old. He passed away on March 31st. And we'd like to pay a short tribute to Ed for all of his service. Normally we have a moment of silence, but we didn't think that would be appropriate under the present format. So I had the honor of sitting next to Ed during the past president's dinner in October of this last year at the Wisconsin Club. And it was a real joy to converse with him and hear a little bit about some of his memories of his time in the Rotary. We had a lovely conversation, but until I read his obituary in Sunday's Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, I had no idea what an amazing life he had, and we just want to highlight two parts of that life. Ed had kind of a rough start. His dad died before Ed was even born. Dad died from pneumonia. However, he went on to thrive and became a member of America's greatest generation. He was attending Washington and Lee University in Washington, D.C., and was able to hear in person Franklin Delano Roosevelt's famous Day of Infamy speech after Pearl Harbor, which resulted in Ed enlisting in the United States Navy in 1942. He attended midshipman school, and his entire naval career was spent in the Pacific theater of war. He was one of the first Americans to get to Hiroshima, Japan, less than 60 days after dropping the atomic bomb in that city. He soon became a lieutenant in the U.S. Naval Reserve and went on to command his own ship in the Philippines before retiring from active duty in 1946. He came home, married his sweetheart, and went on to a very successful career in advertising and finance and became a great community leader. A memorial service is going to be held at a future date. I encourage you to read his full obituary in the Journal Sentinel. It includes more details about his family and his life. The family has suggested memorial donations to St. John's Employee Fund, where Ed resided in his later years, and also the Rotary Club of Milwaukee Scholarship Fund, the scholarship program. Ed's was certainly a life well lived and a great example for all Rotarians. Ed, thank you for your service. And now we have a more joyful opportunity. Ryan Daniels, Executive Director of the Milwaukee Public Museum Foundation, will introduce our latest member, Mary Sprague. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, President Chevalier. I am thrilled to introduce to you a community volunteer with the Milwaukee Public Library Foundation. I am thrilled. When we're talking about today and nonprofits and leadership, it really gives me great joy to introduce you to Mary Sprague. I first had the opportunity to meet Mary through her late husband, Charlie Sprague, who was general counsel for Fiserv all the way until about 2014. After Charlie's passing, Mary wanted to continue his legacy. Charlie was a large leader for the Milwaukee Public Library Foundation and helped with a lot of the strategic planning with Paula Kiley, who I know you all know. In any case, Mary wanted to continue Charlie's legacy, and I am thrilled to have her join us here at Rotary as well. So Mary is a former New York City school teacher at a fairly well-known school called Packard Collegiate. If you are not familiar with the school, you might be familiar with some of their graduates. Lois Lowery, who you may know, a famous author, wrote The Giver. as well as number of stars. Another famous Packer collegiate is Ethan Hawke. And if you're wondering what that institution might look like, while you're viewing Netflix during this pandemic, you can see it featured on Gossip Girl, is where Packard is where all of that was filmed. There's also a rumor that perhaps Peter Fagan and his twin may have gone to that school as well. In any case, Mary got her Bachelor of Psychology from Mary Baldwin College and her master's in teaching from the University of Virginia. As I mentioned, she relocated to Milwaukee with Charlie, and we are so lucky to have her join us here in the Milwaukee community. She has ever since been a committed volunteer and had served for 12 years at the University School of Milwaukee Parents Board. She has also served with First Stage and serves as a vice president of the Milwaukee Public Library Foundation and has served with distinction for at least 5 years. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to introduce you to Mary Sprague, but before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't share with my fellow Rotarians a fun fact. And I'm thrilled to share that Mary has a bit of a unique background. In her youth, she went to 9 different grade schools between grades 1 and 12. One of the distinctions was she had an opportunity to go to the same school in Hawaii that Barack Obama attended, although I think he might have been a few years ahead of her. And then I will also share with you that her father and mother, who both now reside at St. John's, was also Assistant Secretary to the Army of the United States. And her parents, as I mentioned, reside now in Milwaukee along with Mary. But her parents are at St. John's at age 94 and 90. So we look forward to having you as a Rotarian, Mary, for many years to come.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm honored to be part of this impressive group, and I look forward to serving as a Rotarian and meeting all of you in person in the new normal.
Ryan, thank you for introducing her and bringing her into the club. As you all know by now, all of our programming is accessible to the general public, so please make the YouTube and podcast links known to your friends, your colleagues, your family. Hopefully they'll like what they see and they'll consider joining Rotary. Speaking of activities, our coffee connector will connect via the Zoom methodology on Thursday again at 7:30 a.m. this week. It's not quite the same as getting together physically, but the groups have enjoyed meeting that way and talking. I've done a couple of those. The Beer Connector group will get together Thursday, April 16th at 5 p.m. with a slightly different beverage. Guests are always welcome at our social and volunteer events, so just let Michelle in the office know if you'd like to invite somebody, and she'll let you know how to get that done. And if you haven't yet used Zoom, or if you'd like to know a few more of the tricks of using that successfully, Michelle is going to lead another tutorial tomorrow at 2 p.m. So just let her know and she will give you the link. So before I introduce the speaker today, just a couple of mechanical things we should talk about. We'll be sending in questions via chat. So if you're on Zoom, please use the chat function to type in your questions. And also, if you're looking at this on YouTube, you'll have to do texting as we did last week. The text number to text a question in. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, our fellow Rotarian, Steve Zimmerman. Steve is the principal at Spectrum Nonprofit Services, which is a Milwaukee-based national nonprofit management consulting firm where he provides training and consulting in the areas of finance and strategy for community-based foundations, organizations, and government agencies. He's the author of 2 books. The first, The Sustainability Mindset, Using the Matrix Map to Make Strategic Decisions, and a best-selling book entitled Nonprofit Sustainability, making strategic decisions for financial viability. Steve's extensive nonprofit experience includes serving as the Chief Financial Officer, Development Officer, and Director, and the Associate Director of various community-based nonprofits where he performed turnarounds, resulting in increased financial sustainability and programmatic reach. He's a certified public accountant. He earned his BA from Claremont McKenna College and an MBA from Yale University. So it's a great honor to introduce Steve Zimmerman.
Thank you, President Steve, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I really want to kind of start out today's session by giving you an opportunity just to take a deep breath, because I feel like in these moments, we've been all running so quickly that it's hard to find some time to breathe. So let's just think about that. And now I'm going to ask you to think about something a little more troubling. Imagine Milwaukee for a moment without the art museum. Imagine girls not being able to experience the eye-opening programming of the Girl Scouts. Imagine the state of Riverside or Washington Park without the Urban Ecology Center. Imagine our rivers without the efforts of Milwaukee Riverkeeper to test and clean them. Imagine the state of poverty in our city without the efforts of groups like the YWCA, or how homeless population might surge even more without the efforts of Salvation Army, Pathfinders, Hope House, and so many more. Yes, imagine Milwaukee for a second without these or other quality human service and arts organizations, culture, education, youth development, and civic engagement. Well, unfortunately, during this pandemic, these frightening thoughts are easier to imagine than ever. We're all rightly concerned with the public health, and the disruption to employment and the economy is very vivid. What tends at times, though, to get lost in these conversations are those organizations that are designed to build the fabric of our society, lift up our most vulnerable, strengthen our communities, and enrich our lives. Those nonprofit organizations that we all rely upon in one way or another. They represent our passions and values, and many of us here today on this Zoom meeting support nonprofits through our professions, our volunteering, or our contributions, and in many cases, all three. Beyond building community, though, Wisconsin's nonprofit sector also makes an economic impact. As the Helen Bader Institute for Nonprofit Management at UWM said in their 2019 Nonprofit Wisconsin in Brief report, nonprofits contribute significantly to Wisconsin's economy and well-being by addressing problems that the government and for-profits cannot or will not take on. The results is there's an expansion of employment, opportunities for people in Wisconsin. It bolsters productivity through volunteers and contributes to the federal and state tax base. In fact, the study found that nonprofits accounted for almost 12% of statewide employment. They generated $37.8 billion in revenue for the state in 2018. And nationally, the sector contributes almost 6% to the GDP. So the vibrancy of the sector is important, not only nationally, but here in Wisconsin as well. And this is particularly significant because at this moment, like so many individuals and other businesses, the fragility of our nonprofit sector and nonprofit organizations is especially evident. In a national survey that was done by La Piana Consulting, 93% of those nonprofits surveyed have altered their services already. 70% have lost in revenue, with a little over a quarter of responding nonprofits reporting that they have lost between 50 and 100% of their revenue. This is a crisis of great magnitude, and while I would love to report to you some Wisconsin-specific data, our very own nonprofit center and our statewide association of nonprofits both closed within the last year, so there's none to report. We know, though, that organizations from large anchor institutions to smaller and newer nonprofits are hurting. Several have furloughed staff and are engaging in the difficult discussions about whether to do so. And while there's hope that federal stimulus money offered through the CARES Act will help sustain nonprofits over the next 8 weeks, it isn't clear how many will be able to actually access those resources. Even scarier, perhaps, we all know that 8 weeks is no silver bullet, and July will not look or feel like January. Yeah, it's hard to estimate how many nonprofits are born or die each year, but in some estimates during the Great Recession from 2008 to 2013, we lost roughly 5% of organizations nationally. This time could be much worse, with some experts saying we could lose a quarter of our nonprofits nationally. So we can imagine a Milwaukee without some of our iconic institutions or innovative new ideas, or we can be prepared to take action. So just a little over a month ago, we were talking with organizations about sustainability, recognizing that deep interconnectedness between an organization's ability to be financially viable and their ability to accomplish their mission. We were talking about being relevant to our communities and making sure that everyone's voice was heard and that everyone had a seat at the table. Well, those conversations about sustainability seem almost quaint today as nonprofit leaders in this moment worry about survivability. However, even with this shift, many of the principles that we talked about still remain the same. So today, what I'd like to do is to offer you kind of a framework, 5 things to consider for navigating the crisis to help organizations survive. I offer these for nonprofit leaders, which in my definition includes almost everyone engaged with a nonprofit, which is just about everyone in this virtual room. It only takes one voice, whether that comes from the board, whether it be a volunteer, whether it be a staff person or a CEO, to begin that conversation. The first point is to know your cash position. Now, it's often said that cash is king, and for any business, nonprofit or for-profit, in this moment, it's particularly true. To survive this crisis, one of the most important things a nonprofit leader and board can do is to know their cash position. Now, this is inherently more challenging for nonprofits because of restricted cash. Those contributions received from donors for a specific purpose. For example, if an organization, let's say it has money that a donor restricted to an outreach program or an in-person education program, well, we know that most likely isn't happening anymore. In order to use those resources for another purpose, the organization needs permission of the donor. This can hamstring leadership during a crisis, and one of the challenges, especially for board members, is it often makes the cash position look better than it really is. Now, thankfully, in this moment, many foundations have actually released the restrictions, recognizing the dramatic change in programming has altered with the altered landscape. So, there are many cases where you can use that cash, but there is an additional step that needs to happen before you're able to do that. I think knowing your cash position may seem straightforward, but it is essential because organizations need to know how much runway they have. And the answer sometimes, let's be honest, can be quite scary. We often say in good times that organizations should have built up between 3 and 6 month reserve. It's a nice statement to say, but many have significantly less than that. We did a study several years ago of nonprofit organizations in Washington, D.C., lots of nonprofit organizations there. The average reserve of those organizations was roughly 3 weeks. 3 weeks, not a lot of time. Even with the fear that this number may invoke, knowing the cash position will allow leadership to know how much time they have to make key decisions. And that brings us to our second point. So if we think about this, we need to assess the revenue streams that we have and what damage they have incurred during this moment. Now, we all know that spring is event season here in Milwaukee, and well, we all know how that's going to go this year. Sometimes I'm a little grateful to have my Saturday nights back, but not when I think of what it means to the organizations I like to support. While some revenue streams have gone to zero, others have increased though. Local funders have stepped up, and the government has stepped up for those providing direct services, especially to our most vulnerable. And while it is conservative for an organization when they're assessing their cash flow to say, oh, our revenue is going to go to zero, that doesn't necessarily lead to strategic or beneficial decision making. It's not necessarily the best case answer. Hopefully, your organizations have stewarded donors in the good times so that they are there for you when the future is even more uncertain. In times of crisis, relationships matter. Revisiting revenue streams also allows leadership the opportunity to discuss revised plans and to focus on those efforts where the organization has the strongest relationships and the greatest likelihood of securing funds. It's not necessarily a time to be going out and trying to secure new funds as much as it is right now understanding who are the core investors in our organization, how do they feel about us, can they perhaps help us grow more revenue. It's also an opportunity to think creatively about revenue. For example, some special events have already moved online. New York is streaming operas. The Milwaukee Rep here is streaming one of their plays. The Milwaukee Youth Symphony Orchestra is preparing for their annual event to be virtual. Many nonprofits are also sending videotaped messages to supporters as a way of touching base and staying in touch in this moment. It's a great area for board members and for people in this room to engage. I know board members, it's very in fashion to say we don't like fundraising, but now's the time to get over that if we like our organization. Who do you have a relationship with? This is the time to lean in and engage for the sake of your organization's survival. With all that's going on, it's also a meaningful way that volunteers can engage, in particular, to share the workload. As I said earlier, we're not going back to January. And the truth is that when we're assessing revenue and we're looking at our cash position for many nonprofits, it will be a time to make some tough decisions. That's what brings us to our third point, which is looking at the dual bottom line. When cash gets tight, the financial bottom line becomes readily apparent. But nonprofits answer to a dual bottom line of impact and financial viability. In stressful times, it's important for us to consider them both. We build nonprofit organizations to change our community for the better. And in moments like this, we need to consider not only our financial goal, but more importantly, I would say, or as importantly at least, our ability to accomplish our mission. Put another way, our reason for existence. Especially if challenging decisions need to be made about where to focus, or perhaps, put another way, where to cut, leaders must consider the impact of each program and fund the highest programs first. Now, this is often a difficult discussion, but I really believe that if you do a straight across the board cut, you end up cutting your impact greater than what that percentage is. Everything an organization does has value, but if we're really being honest and candid, not everything has the same value. Are there projects that we could put on hold? What has the most value? What has the most impact in our community that we need to protect? Could unrestricted resources and staff be transferred to those efforts? Could reducing expenditures on lower impact items help us in terms of cash reserves? One common response to that crisis, as I said, is to do that across the line cut, but having a candid conversation is helpful for us as we're moving forward. Not only does this allow the organization to most effectively have impact and accomplish the mission given the resources available, but it also helps us make the case for increased support to funders. Thinking like this also provides us the opportunity to envision a different future. Maybe now is the time to focus on new programs, new delivery methods, or new technology. So many organizations have pivoted within the last couple weeks. What can we learn from these experiences? Are there efficiencies to be gained or something new that should become permanent? Is there a promising new way of helping and having impact with our constituents that we want to pursue wholeheartedly? Either way, when we make decisions about how an organization will survive and what it will look like in the future, we need to make sure that we hold the finances and the impact together, recognizing that these two components together make up our business model. In the nonprofit world, it's not one or the other, it's both, and that every conversation affects both of them. So how we go about these discussions is important, and that brings us to our next point, which is to include everyone in the discussion. Unfortunately, there are no right answers to any of these challenging questions. And ideas for sustaining organizations can come from anywhere. They know no positional boundaries. Especially today, it's never been more apparent, frankly, that no one person knows what is coming next and what we must do. So engaging everyone in these candid conversations can often surface new approaches or meaningful strategies. At their heart, nonprofit organizations are community-based organizations. And in moments like these, we need to rely on our close community for support and surfacing answers. Determining the organization's cash position, which was our first step, will inform how much time leadership has to meaningfully engage a broad group of people in discussion. At a minimum, however, board and senior leadership should be involved in surfacing potential solutions. Sometimes board members like to sit back and wait for senior leadership to bring them the solutions. I would say at this moment, it's time to lean in and be at the table as they get surfaced. Ideally, board and senior leadership would be informed by staff and constituents. I think it's especially important for social service organizations that we know what the needs of those people we serve are. Oftentimes, and too oftentimes, our boards don't reflect the constituents we serve. Now's the time to make sure that we truly understand their needs and that their voices are reflected in our ongoing discussions. Again, the easy solution in these times is for a small group to come together at the top of the organization's leadership and make decisions. But this group may not be as well informed as they possibly could be. By opening the discussion, unexpected opportunities might surface. And additionally, by sharing the complexity of the decision to be made and the options to consider, leadership helps to build community and buy-in for whatever the implementation may be. When involving people, it's important to communicate consistently. And that is what brings me to our fifth and final point here. I think this point might be the most important one, because oftentimes in times of crisis, when leadership is busy trying to serve constituents and make informed decisions to save their organizations, communication can lapse. We're busy. Leaders may feel they have nothing new to say, or they might not have a path forward or a solution yet. for the organization, and therefore they don't want to communicate to key stakeholders unless they truly know exactly what's going to happen. Well, you know, this, unfortunately, while it's understandable, I think is the wrong course of action. Nonprofit organizations are expressions of our humanity. People coming together to build stronger, more enriching, and more equitable communities. By expressing also and showing the hardship that our organizations are experiencing and the difficult choices that must be made, we invite others to participate in the process. We're all joined together in this time, living through a pandemic the likes of which none of us has ever seen. And this is also true of our donors. Helping donors understand firsthand what your constituents and the organization face allows them to support you in the most effective manner. It also, at this moment, allows them to be connected out into the community while they're still safer at home. We can not only talk with stakeholders when things are going well. Helping everyone understand how the organization is maximizing impact, helping everyone understand the value of the organization, not just today, but perhaps in the future when things get a little bit more back to normal, helping them know that we're leading with our values, that we value them and that they are a true partner in this effort, that we understand and we're listening to the needs of constituents that are changing day by day. Helping them keep that in front of mind strengthens the connection that we have between our donors, between our staff, between our volunteers, and between our board. That connection will be necessary for organizations to survive this shock and ultimately be able to thrive once again. This is also, I should say, another great place for the board to engage and for board members to step in. You know, sometimes when you're in the moment of kind of having, you know, dealing with a crisis and responding, staff may feel that they're communicating clearly and that, you know, I can't believe I have to say this again. I've said it so many times, but they, you know, might have a misperception. Help staff by lifting them up. Guide them in this communication process. Help them kind of know exactly what to say and how many times they have to say it. None of us as humans enjoy experiencing uncertainty, and yet all of us are experiencing that at this moment. Consistent communication helps to reduce anxiety, and so therefore, we must do it over and over again. So 5 steps, and I want to take your questions and get to those in a second. None of them are easy in good times. None of them are easy, especially in a crisis. I often say in nonprofit organizations, and you know this goes for operating nonprofits as well as foundations, sometimes we're waiting for the bad idea to come across our desk so we can easily say no. Now, that doesn't happen in normal operations, and it's not happening really at this moment either. But we still have to look at it and to make some tough decisions. Given this rapidly evolving pandemic, it's tempting to put off that decision making, right? Let's see how the situation progresses. Let's see what happens. But one lesson that we do have from the Great Recession, which I think applies to today, was that those organizations that assessed their situation earlier were able to make strategic decisions which resulted in less severe measures later. Nonprofit leaders face competing demands at this moment, and their priorities are all over the place as they deliver on their mission. But we all have a role to play. By inviting others into the conversation, by communicating clearly with them, by looking at the organization holistically, including impact and finances together, by understanding where we're starting from financially, we won't ultimately have to imagine a Milwaukee without the vibrant sector that builds our city and brings meaning to our lives. With these steps and frameworks, We hope that leadership can attempt to spread the workload, to build commitment, to surface strategies, and implement solutions to help their organizations and our communities. We've all been a little bit paralyzed. It's hard to believe that a month ago, you know, we were all at work on a normal day, or at this time in the day on a Tuesday, we were at Rotary. But today we're not. It's a fast changing situation. And if our organizations are going to survive this, we need to take action together. And it's in all our best interest to do so, so that our communities, as well as our organization, can not only survive, but once again, eventually thrive, adding to the reasons that we all love Milwaukee. So thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk with you today. I'm very happy to take your questions as we talk about what organizations can do to go from sustainability to survivability. So we have a question came in. It says, how do nonprofits maintain the perceived value or the value proposition of their services and offerings, even though the contributed revenue may be less? So it's a great question. I think for me, I go back to the dual bottom line and trying to say which of our activities has the highest impact. And that's really kind of the core that you want to have. I don't think we should necessarily pretend that we are going to be having the same breadth or scale of services that we had last year. Certainly, I think, you know, the world has changed, and so we need to be honest about that. But if we talk about the impact that we're having on the people that we're reaching, I think that begins to get to that key message that donors can understand. One thing I'll say about that is that, you know, you're right in the sense, especially, that we do want to focus on our impact. There's been there was some articles in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that was talking about the fact that a lot of organizations are coming out and saying that they're hurting. You know, we are hurting. We need your money. We're completely out of money, and forgetting the impact side. And especially with the number of new unemployment claims, et cetera, that statement can be made by many, and that those messages were falling flat with donors. So it is about the impact, and I would take it to that next step and say, what's the impact? What's our highest impact program? What does that have? And that begins to become your value proposition. So your value proposition is a little bit more focused, but it's still there and something that your donors care about. Other questions they have, or Mary, do you have any that's coming over there? So a question, thank you, Jenny, for you. Have foundations changed their giving since COVID-19? And the short answer to that is yes, actually, many foundations have. So there's been a couple of different things. I'm going to start a little bit with the local level, and then I'm going to take you to the national. Locally, there's been the United Way, together with other agencies, has really set up an immediate response, an urgent response center to try and collaborate and connect donations to those organizations that are serving the most vulnerable and that are really on the front lines of the pandemic in many ways. And so they have done a great job of convening groups together. The Greater Milwaukee Foundation also has some a task force around 6 key areas that they are launching to talk about what can be done, and are putting out funds in that task force. I know Northwestern Mutual has made a large series of grants around COVID-19. So there's a lot of kind of local efforts that are going on there. Nationally, I think we're seeing a lot of leadership from foundation world, in particular, the releasing of restrictions and making things from restricted grants to general operating support, as well as several foundations, the Libra Foundation, et cetera, doubling their grants in this particular period. You know, one of the big discussions that we have is that, foundations are required to distribute at least 5% of their endowment and, for tax-related purposes. And there's a lot of discussion that right now is not the time for foundations to be worried about their endowment. They need to be worried about what their mission is. And there's a lot of push and pull on that and a lot of discussions, but I think that the philanthropic community has been pretty good at coming together to respond to the crisis. question here about what about local kids sports clubs? These are membership clubs that are also tenuous and struggling and don't have any donors. Yeah, I mean, I didn't in my example include that, including many that are all volunteer run and things like that. I think that the hard part is if you're not providing services, your membership base, you're not providing services, you don't necessarily, you don't necessarily have the income coming in. And so it is very hard. Again, I come back to relationships. Who are the core people who have been involved in that organization that can help you come together and think this through? You don't have any donors. Could you potentially have donors in that? Thinking about kind of that sort of structure and what does that look like? Are there things that you can do to reach out and connect? I know our kids' Little League actually just this morning sent out an email about how your kids should be stretching and exercising at home while the Little League team can't play together. So again, it comes back to that relationships, and are there ways that you can connect with people in that? And then, those would be the people that would be most likely to invest in the organization's future.
I don't have any more questions for you on my end, Steve. So I think, again, here comes another one.
Here we go. From a donor perspective, how do you think donors are prioritizing giving at this moment? It's a really good question, and we were just having a discussion about this yesterday because I think that some donors are shifting their priorities and are prioritizing immediate needs, right? So I was with a donor yesterday that typically funds in another area, and they were shifting their funding to go to Hunger Task Force and Feeding the Hungry, and so there certainly was a shift, and I know among many nonprofits that there is anecdotal evidence that that is happening. I don't know exactly what that will mean for the long term, right? I don't know if that means that people are really going to shift in those areas, or if they will, once kind of the initial crisis passes, if they'll go back to kind of what their core values are and where that is. What I will say is this: there is not a single organization that isn't affected by COVID-19. And, there are some organizations, I do a lot of work in the arts and culture sector, they have been incredibly affected. And so if we really think about where do I want to give as a donor, I guess I just ask you to think about what those organizations that you've supported in the past, what they're, how they're coping and how they're doing, because otherwise, when we come out of this, those organizations may not be there as well.
Thank you, Steve. And I guess I would also just take a moment to say that from the perspective of the Rotary Club of Milwaukee, we are really struggling, or struggling maybe too strong of a word, but really trying to give some very serious thought to our philanthropy and how we're making a difference in the community. One of the activities that we typically engage in each spring is a reach out to our members to support Rotary International's Polio Plus campaign. And, we've had to ask ourselves, is this the right time to do that? I mean, but where we're coming down, and I'd be interested in what you think about this, is that Rotary is, polio is really a backbone project initiative of Rotary International, and that if we, as Rotarians, can stop supporting it, that doesn't really feel right to us. It feels that Rotarians are known for being persistent, and that we need to have some persistence here. And that also, we can also make the argument that the infrastructure that's been created to deliver polio vaccinations around the world has been helpful in many other public health crises, and is also valuable in the COVID-19. But we have been looking at, is this the right time to ask our members to contribute to something that's really at the heart of Rotary International as well.
Mm-hmm. And Mary, just to piggyback on that, because Ryan asked the question, there are tax incentives for donors that were included in the CARES Act as well. That there is a universal deduction essentially now just for this year above the line so that your donations can go up to, I think it went from 60 to 100%, though don't quote me on that, of AGI for donation and deductibility up to a certain point, to try and encourage more people to donate to nonprofits. So, you know, from that standpoint, I think, you know, there is incentive there too from the stimulus packages.
Great. I think we have one more question there.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Yeah, so kind of what are two key leadership principles to guide nonprofit leaders for their organizations and team at this point? And that is a great question, Karen Hung. Thank you for getting right to the heart of it there. You know, so my two pieces would be this. I think one is to lead with impact. You know, impact is our value proposition for nonprofits. So understand your impact, understand how you deliver impact, and lead with that impact. Understand what it costs and how you're going to support that, but lead with impact. And then the second one is to involve everyone. You know, nonprofit organizations are public benefit organizations, right? I mean, they are about benefiting our community and our society, and we each have a role to play. And so I think that, you know, trying to communicate, trying to be open, and remember that, you know, that there are a lot of good ideas out there. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bad ones too, but, you know, trying to sort through that and get those pieces together, I think, is really important for people. So those would be my two kind of key things: lead with impact and include people, include everyone in those discussions.
Well, that might be a really appropriate transition point. Thank you, Steve. I think that we all really learned some very valuable ways of looking at the current situation. And I know that you have another webinar to do in just a few minutes. So we want to give you a chance to have a drink of water before you move on. But so I will say thank you, and we'll turn it over to President Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Steve. Great presentation. And as Mary mentioned, we're doing our best right now to respond to the current crisis, but Rotary International and the Rotary Club of Milwaukee continue to fight polio. So in honor of your presentation today, we'll purchase 50 more doses of the vaccine for the old virus and get us that much closer to eliminating that one, and then keep that infrastructure in place for purposes of future vaccines, which I'm sure will be coming around the bend sooner than later. We have a few closing announcements. Check your screen at the end of this presentation for the virtual events that are coming up. There's links in the survey after this meeting to register for the orientation tomorrow and for our coffee connector on Thursday. Next week, we're going to hear from Bill Berrien, who's president of Pindell Global Precision, which is a new Berlin-based company, which has transitioned to manufacturing ventilator parts, which is a hugely necessary item in this particular environment. So welcome to the club, Mary. Thanks everyone who attended today. And now let's go out and do some good in the world. Stay home and stay safe when you can. This meeting is adjourned.